Good evening, everyone, and welcome. My name is Tico, and I run events here at the Strand. Before we launch into a discussion of Taylor Harris's debut memoir, This Boy We Made, a memoir of motherhood, genetics, and facing the unknown, I'd like to share a little bit of history about the Strand. The Strand was founded in 1927 by Benjamin Bass on 4th Avenue's Book Row. Stretching from Union Square to Astor Place, Book Row gradually dwindled from 48 bookstores until after 94 years, the Strand is the sole survivor, now run by third-generation owner Nancy Bass-Wyden. We want to thank all of you for your support. Without our loyal community of book lovers and authors, such as Taylor and Nicole, we wouldn't be here today. We are thrilled to have Taylor Harris with us for the launch of her debut memoir, This Boy We Made, a memoir of motherhood, genetics, and facing the unknown. Taylor Harris is a writer, wife, and mom of three who lives in Charlottesville, Virginia. Her work has appeared in Time, O Quarterly, The Washington Post, Long Reads, The Cut, Romper, Parents, McSweeney's, and other publications. Joining Taylor in conversation is Nicole Chung. Nicole Chung is the author of national bestseller, All You Can Ever Know, named a Best Book of the Year by NPR, The Washington Post, The Boston Globe, Time, Library Journal, and many other outlets. All You Can Ever Know was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award, a semifinalist for the Penn Open Book Award, and an Indies Choice Honor Award. Nicole is currently a contributing writer and editor at The Atlantic, where she writes a weekly newsletter. Her work has appeared in numerous publications, including the New York Times, the New York Times Magazine, GQ, Time, The Guardian, Vulture, and Slate. Prior to joining The Atlantic, Nicole spent 5 years at the independent publisher Catapult, where she oversaw the digital editorial team, co-edited 2 anthologies, and helped lead the magazine to its first National Magazine Award. In 2021, she was named the first Good Morning America AAPI Inspiration List, honoring those making Asian American history right now. Her next 2 books are forthcoming from Echo Books, HarperCollins, and Harper Teen. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Taylor and Nicole to the stage.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the Strand. Hi, Taylor.
Hi, how are you, Nikki?
Good. How are you?
Pretty sweet, pretty sweet.
Yeah, just having a real normal one, I bet. Just a very typical week.
No big deal. I mean, I'm still like packing lunches in the morning, you know, it's just picking up the kids. It's fine.
Excellent. Well, I hope you've had a great pub week so far. Thank you for asking me to be here with you. I think you're going to start off by reading. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
So I'm going to read from like not quite halfway through the book, and in this section, we have finally got an appointment for Tophs, my son, with the developmental pediatrician who had like a long wait list. And my expectations, even though I've sort of been let down before, are that like we will really solve this case in this appointment. So it's about a 5-minute section that I'm going to read. So hang in there with me. He drew a horizontal line. Can you draw this for me? He asked. Tophs did. Then he drew a vertical line. How about this? Tophs's lines were shakier, fainter, made with a fisted grip, but they were there. Well, that's good news, Dr. Perry said. The fact that he was able to copy those lines means his intelligence is at least on the low side of average. Had he just handed us a life vest or shot a hole through our boat? He finished examining Tophs in about 10 minutes and then sat Paul and me down while Tophs and Elliot played. When I look at his records, the poor growth, carnitine deficiency, history of hypoglycemia, and now global developmental delay, he's got something. We're just not smart enough to figure it out yet. Something global yet. This wasn't a fluke. Tophs had stumped the best. I processed this much before the tunnel started to narrow. Given your levels of education, he's certainly an outlier. Outlier, like begets like, each seed after its own kind. I think you should see genetics again for whole exome sequencing, and he should have every new wave of genetic testing that becomes available. Science is moving so fast, and what we don't know now, we might know in 10 years. Maybe one day somebody in Europe will discover the Christopher syndrome. Every new test, Europe, my boy, as a syndrome. And then as the conversation wound down, if he were my son, I'd go ahead and schedule a brain MRI. As I sat across from Dr. Perry, I heard outlier as a painful marker of deficit. What did it mean that our son looked small but fine on the outside, yet was struggling to communicate, to understand? What if he was lonely or frustrated or scared and couldn't tell us? What if the world was closed off to him in ways it remained wide open to me? This type of limitation was not what I'd imagined for my child, and the painful path between mystery and atypical, which was really no path at all, was not the one I thought I'd travel. The first time I heard the term liminal, I was 18, sitting in an African American Studies 101 class at the University of Virginia. A tall and slender Professor Penningroth, his complexion like my mother's relatives, had written the words middle passage in the center of a blackboard. He walked us through not just the number of Black bodies taken or the number of years over which they were stolen, but what it might have been like to be yanked into a void, to live or die between what was and what would be. Liminal comes from the Latin word for threshold. When your life, your customs, your expectations are ripped away, as in the case of slaves, or if they disintegrate through grief and mystery, you stand at this threshold. On one side, I see the disintegration of my assumptions about myself, motherhood, and my children. In the space between, the space of not yet, I tread water while going to doctor's appointments and Googling, while noticing illnesses or quirks or developmental delays, while waiting for the one doctor on the right ship to come scoop us up from the depths. On the other side, who knows? I'd always assumed the other side was an answer, a new set of boundaries, a new territory to navigate and accept. I'm not sure I would know the other side now if it slapped me in the face. How do you recognize the thing you're looking for when it has no name, no shape? Someday, someone in Europe. This space can be relentless in its power to hold my imagination captive, to dash what's beautiful and true to pieces. Because as I sit across from the doctor and hear outlier, as I push off into the deep, I do not think about the way Tophs wakes up early one morning to put together a puzzle all by himself, nor how he intuitively cups my face in his hands and gazes into my eyes. I cannot yet know that he is capable of ordering a metal yo-yo off Amazon without any instruction, because Tophs will think about and do things we would never think of or be able to do at such a young age or ever. Outlier. Somehow these truths deserve to make it to the other side, even if my hands are heavy with doubt. Moses instructed the Israelites to remember the words of the God who had delivered them from slavery. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as symbols on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates. If the great doctor never comes along in his great boat, if I never get to the other side, I want someone to find me. I want them to see every dream for Tophs stamped across my forehead, the names of his gifts written on my forearms. Thank you.
Thank you so much for reading that. It was beautiful. And I think it's the first time I've gotten to hear you read. And it's funny because we've known each other for a long time, right? We met in like 2013. I feel like I tell the story of us meeting all the time, by the way. So
no, tell it again, please.
Oh my God. Okay. I love also that, like, you know, you mentioned it in your book acknowledgements, and I've also written about it like in public spaces, but we were introduced at a writing conference, right, in DC in 2013 in the bathroom. We met in the bathroom. Thanks, Kathy Alter, for being there and saying, I think you two would really get along. Honestly, like meeting you was the greatest thing I got out of that conference. And I don't mean to like, it was a fine conference, but like that, your friendships just meant so much to me over the years. And I just want to say, I've been waiting for this book for so long, like since we met. I've just been struck ever since I first read your words. And I was actually your fan before we met in the bathroom. I read your McSweeney's column, like religiously. And I was like, this she has something. Like, it was just beautiful, and I knew I'd always be there for anything you wrote. But I would love to just hear in your own words sort of the evolution of this book, like when and how you figured out like that this was going to be a book, and like why you had to tell this story.
I think there's this moment that I actually haven't really shared. I don't know if I've shared it with anyone, but there was this moment when I was sitting in this cafe in Charlottesville called Marie Bet. It's very legit, good lattes and pastries. And I remember having my laptop open and I was working on something, but not this yet. And I think I got some results of Tophs test and then related to my own results. And I was starting to move into some more surveillance of my body. So I was in a more of like a high risk program. And I remember getting some sort of results back or email from the doctor's office and thinking like, oh my gosh, like this story just has more roots than I thought. And I think it might be something. And I think I've hesitated to share that because it feels like, oh, maybe, maybe you just want to like make a story out of your drama or something. And that's not my, that's not my goal. My goal is to like honor what I've experienced and what Tophs has experienced in our family. But I think I've never shared that because I think I saw it so early. Like I saw it as I remember that email coming through and that thought sort of going off in my head, which I don't know, I guess when I say it, it sounds a little phony. But that was when I first thought like, oh man, this might have another layer. Like I'm more connected to Tophs. My body is more connected to him than I thought after like birthing him, which says a lot. And then I feel like you were a big part of that, Nikki. And I'm not just saying that because you're on here. I feel like, do you remember those revolving doors? Like there are still some, but I feel like they were really big, like in the 80s and 90s. Like that was a really big thing to like just go like spin in the doors. And if you guys can follow with me on this for a little bit. So I had this like image today where I was thinking, you know who Nikki is? Nikki's like if you're going through one of those revolving doors and like you're on the other side. And because of my anxiety, I tend to like you're supposed to like use the door to get in. And I feel like with my anxiety, I tend to like want to just like stick in that revolving door and like I like get to the other side where you are. I'm like, hey, good talk, Nikki. See you later. And like go back around where I'm just by myself and safe. And I feel like what's been important about you is like an encourager, an editor, a friend, a mentor is that I feel like you sort of sense that about me and you'll stay on that other side and just be like, hey, like when you're ready, if you ever want to write a book, I think I might know someone. And I feel like you did that a couple of times. And I would just be like,
I am your most annoying friend. Let's just put that out there.
What did you say?
I said, I'm your most annoying friend / editor. We'll just.
No, but you're so gentle. And the way you said it, it's like eventually I hold on to that. I'm like, okay, now I'm ready to process. Like maybe I am ready to turn this into something bigger. So thank you.
Oh my gosh. I mean, thank you for sharing your words over the years. I don't just say that to everybody. By the way, this should be a book. So, but you would have gotten there no matter what anyway, even if I were not super annoying. I would love to hear like too how you came to writing, because I don't think you and I have actually talked about this in all our years. Like were you always like writing? Were you one of those kids who made like the construction paper stories that you stapled together, or was it something like you kind of came to later? And how did you find your way to like essay and memoir specifically?
Yeah, so thank you for also being born around the same time again, because I have another 80s reference. Growing up in Ohio, we made wallpaper books. Did you ever make those? So like, I don't know, my first grade teacher, like the outside was wallpaper and the inside was like that sort of flimsy, brownish, creamish paper with the lines.
So like wallpaper samples or something, or like, okay. That has jogged my memory a little bit.
Yeah, they were big where I was from, and they were free in my class, and so I made a lot of them. And my first grade teacher, her name is Mindy Hall. I still call her Mrs. Hall. She's still in Ohio. And she just like had an eye for, I don't know if it was called differentiated instruction back then, but she was a young teacher, sort of like fresh out, and she would just like let me write. She would be like, you want to write longer in your journal, like go write, go sit in the hallway if you want, while the other kids were like playing with like math manipulatives. And like, I am not as strong in math. I just want to put that out there, but I am just so happy that she saw me. And so I really feel like she got me started. And then I went to high school. I had a couple of English teachers who at the time I was so upset. Like one of them made us submit to these essay contests. I think we had to do one each semester. And I was like, well, this is the worst. But then like I won a couple of them and I was like, well, that's great. And so just things like that. I went to college. I hated exams, like multiple choice. That is not really my game. But I didn't hate doing papers and like researching. And then I married Paul and he was like, have you ever heard of this thing called creative nonfiction? And I was like, what is that? And I found the program, the Johns Hopkins program in DC, which was really cool. I could drive there and, go there part-time. And so I think memoir and personal essay is always what I was writing. I just didn't think I knew that there were names for that. I mean, you remember David from the program, he would always be like memoir. And I was like it just sounded like too fancy. Like I'm from Ohio, I can't write that. But I think it's what I was always writing,
Yeah. I can definitely relate to that very much. And I was thinking too, I don't know, when we first met, were you actually writing some fiction? Sorry if you don't want to talk about this, but I was just remembering that
really good question. That's a really good memory. I entered, I think I have a thing for contests. I forget why, but I entered one fiction contest at UEA and I got second place and I was very pregnant. And I think Nikki Giovanni was at the reception. So I think somewhere I have a picture of her and me.
Oh my gosh.
But I'm like, who am I pregnant with? I think I'm pregnant with Tophs. Sorry. One of the babies was in me. Mm-hmm. I think it was Tophs. So one fiction contest. I really enjoyed it, but there's just so much to learn. You're writing, I forgot that you're writing a whole different book. Anyway, so you know a lot about fiction. I'm still trying. Julie, our editor, knows a lot about fiction. I have a friend who's a poet, Natasha, and she calls fiction writers witches. And I really get that because I'm like, how do you guys?
Sorry, but poets are the witches.
No, yeah. I also come
How do they do it? Okay. Thank you for explaining sort of your path to writing, because I don't know why, but somehow we've never really talked about it. So you write this beautiful book, which I'm so happy to be talking to you about. And I think it will be read and appreciated by a lot of parents who've been in similar circumstances, your kids are your heart, running around out in the world. And so the moment, I think you write so beautifully of this powerful vulnerability. And just I think one thing I got from reading your book was just this idea that you can do things for your kids that you can't always do for yourself, push through the anxiety and the fear and all of the pressure to be perfect and just focus on what they need. And I think, another reason I've often turned to your writing on parenting over the years is just because I often feel as though so much writing around parenting is very heavily dominated by white writers. So your work's very important on its own, but I also have always felt it sort of steps into this gap. It's also beautiful and lyrical and hilarious. But I was just wondering if you thought much about that space that you're stepping into, if it created extra pressure for you, that lack of sort of comparable books or comparable stories, or was it just not something you thought about at all?
Yeah. I feel like every question you ask is somehow going to land us in 1989 Ohio. Sometimes I think about maybe I'm used to sort of sliding into those gaps. Not that I always want to. And you and I talk about this, don't just hit me up in February to write you a piece on some Black people. That is tiring. At the same time, I'm well, also who else is gonna do it? There are people out there we're doing it, we're representing, we're stepping up. So it's sort of that tension of yes, I'm here, I'm gonna do it. We need more Black, sort of however you want to say it, memoirs about motherhood, or some people say mommy memoirs. We definitely need them. And it's funny, Disha Philia, she supported this book early on and is a superstar and did not owe me one thing and was so gracious. And the really cool thing is she had written an article years ago, I can't even tell you what year, about the lack of Black like motherhood memoirs. And back then I didn't know her name. Like this was before, her short stories came out. And she just goes through looking for some sort of representation and asking these important questions, like what's going on with publishing. And so it was really cool. I came back to that piece this year after she had endorsed my book, and I wrote her and I bugged her on Twitter, and I was like, is this you? This has to be you. And she was like, yeah, that was me. So I feel like I had this full circle moment. And I also want to be careful by saying like I slide into the gap. I don't want to be like, it's me. Like this, this is the Black motherhood book. What I'm saying is like, I don't mind sometimes, stepping into that space because we need it. And I hope, like, for one, others have gone before me, and I hope to make room for many more, because it's not all going to be about Tophs. There are going to be other stories that we need.
Who are some of those writers? And you mentioned Disha, but like writers, they could be memoirists or not, who you feel kind of either paved the way for you or just inspired you, like maybe books that you thought about while you were writing yours?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and there are like all these categories. So like for one, I was like, it's got to be, I don't want to cut out all the humor because that can make it like really sad. And so we've talked about Megan O'Connell, her memoir, like she just has this way of being funny. And I felt like that allowed me, like, I feel like Megan's that little voice in my head that's just like, it's okay to laugh. And so I kept her memoir by me. Let's see. I have Natasha Trethewey's Memorial Drive, because she's a poet again, another witch.
Yeah.
Is just like, how do you fit like 50 words into like a sentence? It's not fair. And that was sort of like not about motherhood, but about the loss of her mother.
Mm-hmm.
So almost like the inverse sort of what I was writing. I also had sort of memoirs that fall into the category of like loss or grief, or like having a child who's sick.
Mm-hmm.
So Kelly and Thomas French, they wrote about their daughter Juniper, who was born like in 20 some weeks gestation, very early. Raising a Rare Girl, I read. You won't be shocked that I actually read your book. And let me tell you, and you're gonna think I'm just like throwing your name in there, but no, but because I feel like you and I have talked about sort of, it's great to have a story where it's like, man, like I was down in the dumps and then like I climbed Mount Everest and it was great. But I feel like you and I didn't have that story. And we also didn't have the story where like, oh, I tried to like free climb, like free solo, and like I fell off the edge. Like there are some ups and downs, but it's not always like the dramatic ending.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I have talked about like, no, those are stories still worth telling, just because it's not sort of like wrapped up in a bow at the end.
Yeah.
And so yours was really helpful with that too.
Thank you. I mean, I'm always struck, and we've talked about this too, and then the reading that you read tonight where you mentioned that like learning about the word liminal. And I feel like you're one of those writers who's always been in that sort of that threshold, that in between space, and you write about it so beautifully. Like it makes it seem almost every day, like, but it's not, and what you do is so hard and you make it look so easy. But we've talked so much about how you like live and write in those gray areas that a lot of people are actually really uncomfortable with. Like the number of times I think I've been told like, so like, what's the ending? Like, what's the takeaway? And it's not that that's not important for the reader to have something to like grab onto and take with them and know why they read it, but like life, often it's just not tied up neatly. There isn't like that great triumph or that great disappointment. So like, when and how do you kind of figure out that in between space is like where you live as a writer?
I think when you just said it, I'm like thinking back. Light bulb. No, it's helpful to hear though, like how other people take in yours. Like I knew that for this book, and even for the column I wrote at Catapult. But it's interesting then to hear you sort of reflect what I've put out there, and for me to to think that way. I do know that it's really interesting because in a lot of ways, like in my life, I'm pretty black, or like I'm a rule follower, you know, that like, tell me what to, like, even with this pandemic, tell me what to do, I'm going to do it. Like, I need the rules, which is why.
That would be great. That would be great.
The
if that were
CDC is really
happening.
hurting.
Oh gosh.
The people are like, the CDC says take robot tests, and I'm like, oh man, I get it. It's hard. But I do think maybe my writing is the area where I'm okay taking on those gray areas and sitting. And just, you know, writing has there's a lot of outside expectations, especially if you want to publish, but like when it belongs to you, like before it gets to editors, before you're pitching, like you do have that space. I do have that space to sit with it, right? And to think through it. I know we just lost Joan Didion, who talks about, you know, you sort of write to find out like what's up here, right? And what you're thinking. And that's definitely what I get from writing. And so on the outside, I'm very much like, I've got to be right. I've got to do the right thing. I'm very much a perfectionist. And I think, you know, as scary as writing can be, it is a place where I can just sort of explore, and I can always like set it aside. Or, you know, I think you were the one who mentioned like having a file full of like bits that you take out, and that sometimes you'll like even return to them at some point, which I've also found very helpful.
That's how I get away with not like killing my darlings. I just like cut and paste into a document and save them all. You never know.
Just hide darlings.
I want to figure out, so, you know, we've talked a lot too, and I don't want to like have any spoilers whatsoever, but like this book, it sort of sets up if you first start reading it and you don't know you or your family, you might think like, oh, like parent goes in search of answers, parent finds some answers. And like the story that you write is not that straightforward, as you just mentioned. So I'm just curious, like from a writing structure perspective, like how do you kind of figure out like what's the arc of this story if it's not the like sort of mystery solving that you might have like at one time actually thought it would be?
Yeah. Well, for one, I kept waiting to have a dream like you did. Like, you remember when you said like, you fix your structure with a dream, and I did not get that dream.
Well, like that, it's never happened. That was the one time I've ever dreamed about writing, like the one time it was ever useful. So I feel like that's it. It's never going to happen for me again either.
But it was Julie was very helpful. First of all, Julie just kept telling me, Taylor, just get the story out. And that was the best advice. I think she, again, sort of intuitively understood who I am, how I can be very anxious and my hardest critic. So it was like, get the story out. Then I got the story out, and like Julie very kindly was like, okay. Like she'd like point out the points that were like doing pretty well, and then be like, there are some things we need to take a look at. And so eventually what happened was I had this book with me too. But Transcendent Kingdom by Ya Jesse. I don't know why. I remember picking it up and being like, I'm on the clock. I really don't think I have time to like mess around and read fiction right now. Like I think all I need to do is find a good memoir and copy it. But I picked up that book and it was so great. Like I loved Homegoing too, but this one, like she talks about like just all similar topics and themes. Like it's about science, right? It's about religion. It's about depression, mental illness. And I just watched the way she sort of like weaved back and forth. Like I don't want to say jump because it wasn't always abrupt, but sort of moved back and forth between narratives. And honestly, that was helpful. You know, Paul, my husband, he is very practical, and he he painted a dry erase wall in my office. And so I started to get like the fun of it all was I got to pick out the colors of dry erase markers I wanted. And that was like my reward for working on structure. Just like little carrots is all I need. And so I started like mapping out like events from like my life even before Tophs and my anxiety that I thought were significant and needed to make it on the page. And then more sort of having to do with birth of Tophs and after, and just kind of seeing like where they overlapped or where they could connect a little bit and what should rub up against each other. And definitely trial and error. Like I remember the first time I sort of cut and did that, again, Julie was always so gracious, but was basically like, I don't know that this is working. And then we went back to the drawing, right? Like not back to the drawing board, like we didn't start over, but I moved some more things around, but it helped to have those pieces like up there, and then I could just erase and try again.
I love that Paul made you like a dry erase board. Like that's
Um,
incredible. You should have
yeah.
taken a picture and sent it to me. I love that you had like a whole book vision board happening.
Yeah, and like I love like the engagement ring, but dude, like really just like make me a house of dry erase boards and I will stay with you forever.
That's amazing. Okay, I'm letting the audience know this is my official warning to please put your questions in the Q&A box because we're going to switch over in a few more minutes. Thank you all. I have some more questions. Like one thing I think we've also talked about is just like the challenge of bringing people, speaking of Paul, like people in your life, the people you love the most, like to life as characters. It's actually like when you step back and think about it, such an audacious move. Like I'm going to turn you into characters in a book, and not so that like not to present some flattened version of you, but like for the reverse reason, so that readers know who you are, so you live on the page, so you're as real to them as you are to me. Like how did you approach that? What were the challenges? Like I just know it's a hard thing to write about, like the people you love the most.
Yeah.
I'm curious like how you approached that.
You know, I sometimes forget that like I did a lot of research for this book. So I'm actually glad you asked. Not that I'm gonna bore you all with like how much research I did, but like
No, I want to hear all about the research, please.
oh, okay. Hold on. Let me grab one thing. I think I have it somewhere in here, but like Paul. Oh, yes. This is like a Strand exclusive. When we were dating, Paul made me this thing. It says like IF pills, take as needed. And it stands for like intimate friendship because we were like somewhere between friends and lovers. And like I would take one out and it would be like, oh, like I'll drive you to Ohio, or like you can go get a massage. And so this is a long way of saying that like I did research that like that. Like I was combing through like not just like how we met, but what like how did we talk? Like why? I mean, I knew at 21 that I wanted to marry him, and that was not how I was raised. Like I went to school with people who were like, my parents are not going to let me come home after graduation if I'm not like engaged. And that was not how I was raised. So I had to go back and think like, yes, you've been like, now I've been married like, 16 years. But I wanted to go back and just really like, what was it like then? Now we have kids and like sometimes date night is Netflix, especially during a pandemic. And it's hard to like get out, but I just wanted to like remember what was that. So that was almost for every person. So like I did that for Paul, like I went back. I did that for Tophs. I went back to his birth record. Poor Julie. I hope we can do an event where we bring Julie on just so she can have a voice. But like I would send her these texts.
Oh, she's in the chat. Julie Button is in the chat. We love you,
Julie's
Julie.
in the house. Julie, you can't speak really, you can type, but like tell the people. I would send her these texts and these videos of Tophs. Like there's one of him in a tiny UVA football jersey, like dancing to the Lord's song, Royals. Remember when that was really popular? And so it was just like combing through all these videos and pictures and just like, emails that I had saved. And then from there, sort of picking out what are like important things, conversations or pieces that could show the character to the reader. And I feel like I was missing that at first, because at first I'm just thinking, okay, like what has to be told?
What are the facts? Yeah.
Yes.
Like, what's the story? Where's the plot going? And then you realize, oh man, characterization.
Right. Like,
Yeah.
Does anybody else know Tophs danced to like, Cooler Than Me, like the day after he had surgery, he's like in a diaper. And so it's like hitting those details. Some things I'd forgotten or like I wanted to really bring out the details. So I would say like those artifacts, those medical records, journals I'd had. I really went back. Journals, yeah. I know you are a big journaler.
Oh my gosh, I kept a journal from like the age of 5, and I did for my book also go back and like look, and it was like, oh my gosh, kind of weird and horrifying to meet yourself over and over. I want to be sure we get to audience questions, so I'm going to ask one more and then go to the Q&A. But I just wanted to ask, like, and I love to ask this, especially of memoirists, like, this book is a journey. Writing a book is its own journey. And I feel as though you learn a lot about yourself doing that. So I'm just curious how writing this and working on it and also thinking about it like over the course of years, how's it changed you? How's it changed how you feel about your story and your family's story? What do you think are some things you learned about yourself while working on it?
Yeah, I mean, I think more than ever, it just sort of cemented like the truth that it's a story that is worth telling, that deserves to be told, that deserves space. One truth that I came across in my time actually talking to a therapist was like this idea that the book, like it has to be true, it has to be faithful, it doesn't have to be perfect. And I'm sure you can relate to that, like just looking back at, oh, I could have said this a different way or done this, and I didn't. And it's still true and beautiful. And so that was something that I held on to. And then, one thing I said to Paul, just as we, have had kids and I reflect is like, and, I talk about this a little bit with my faith and just sort of how I don't think having faith is about sort of just like exorcising fear all the time or like praying it out, which is sort of how I came to faith, sort of this idea of like getting rid of it. And like, I would love to get rid of my anxiety. I'm not one of those who's like, no, I think I'm like better with it. I'm sort of like, nah, I would give it up, but I don't think that's going to happen. And so one thing that I've learned through this process is like, it's still very present with me. And it's something that I want my kids to know. So like, I'm not that they have to read a book to know their mom had an anxiety disorder. Like they'll probably know. We've actually talked about it, but I want that to be something that that is just shared. It's really important that they know that this was hard for mommy. But there are ways to like cope with it. Sometimes it's harder than other times. And this is something that mommy dealt with for like a huge part of her life. And that was just like, I want them to see like so many different sides of me. And they see like funny mommy and like mad mommy and ice cream mommy. And I want them to know this mommy too.
This book is like so many things. Like it's going to be a gift to anybody who reads it truly. But I mean, I got a little choked up just then thinking about like what a gift it is to your kids, like what an incredible legacy. So thank you for sharing your family and the story with us. I'm going to go to some audience questions. I'm going to ask you first real quick what your favorite current ice cream flavor is. I know it's like your obsession and your love language, and you can talk about ice cream while I look at the Q&A box and pick a question.
My favorite. It's a tie between, so like, okay, like you're just going out to the neighborhood store, you need to pick something up. I would say Ben and Jerry's Netflix and chilled. It's like peanut butter based with like pretzel, sweet and salty pretzel mixed in with like brownie chunks. And I really feel like they were working out the kinks at first. Like the brownie chunks have gotten bigger and softer over time. Maybe I'm just making that up. So
I should have focus group to this. You should be their focus.
Not getting paid. Like at least pay my mortgage, people. And then I would say, like, if you can order anywhere, I would get Graders from Ohio. It's based in Ohio. You can buy it in some like Wegmans and different stores, some Kroger's. But peanut butter chip is not easy to find in a store. And so what happened was I might have had 6 pints shipped to me for my book pub week, and they might be in my freezer now.
How many have you worked your way through?
No, I've only opened one. And it was on dry ice, so it was so cold and hard when I got there today. And so like I was like, I gotta prep for my talk with Nikki. And so I took out like a fork and started like just trying to like chip away some, and it punctured my hand, but I'm fine.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm glad you're okay. I wish I were there to actually eat ice cream with you. So yeah. Okay, we're gonna go to the audience questions. One of them is can you talk about your experiences with like physicians and medical professionals, like in terms of what was helpful and maybe what was hurtful? Obviously only as much as you want to share, and there's obviously a lot in the book too, but
yeah, I mean, I think everyone sees it right now, right? Like people are overworked. feels like hospitals are collapsing. So this wasn't even during, a lot of these experiences didn't happen right during the pandemic. And so I think we're dealing with things sort of amplified right now. But I think just those who, I don't know what it's like to be in healthcare, to be honest, but people who took the time to just ask us questions and listen. Some of the hardest times were when, in the book, I talk about one time where I brought in a list of like symptoms and like a calendar. Like I really thought I was doing great. Like, here's what I saw. Can you? And the doctor sort of just like was like, here, like you keep that, almost like it was like dirty or something, and didn't want to see it. Or the doctor who was like, you gave your daughter Tylenol for that sort of fever. And I was like, I don't know. Yeah. And he was like, where do you live again? And I was like, what? And so those are some of the hardest things, or like when decisions are being made quickly and you don't know, like, is it because I look young? Is it because, I'm a stay-at-home mom? Is it because I'm Black? Like, what is it? Why are you making these choices? And you don't usually get to figure that out.
Right.
On the other side, I want to be careful to shout out the people who, Shelly, I think is on here. She is Tophs' genetic counselor. And she is another one like Julie who just gets constant texts. Like it can be random. It can be him like singing a new song, or it can be me like, hey, I found this like gene mutation. What do you think? Could that be related to Tophs? And so there have been people who have been like, yeah, like our ride or dies, who I don't care if Shelly like quits genetic counseling, and opens up like a surf shop. Like she's still going to be in my life because she pays so close attention to us. And I'm sure I bugged her, but she didn't let me know. She was always present.
Another question. This is from Shannon, who I think we both know Shannon. Hi, Shannon.
Shannon.
So she says, how does it feel to put such private thoughts and writing out into the world for the first time in book form, especially like when it involves your family, as we've been discussing? How did you figure out a way to write this and be so vulnerable?
Yeah. I had a moment yesterday maybe where like, I think one of my biggest enemies is sort of like shame. That's sort of where I can go if I'm having a tough time. And so that crept in for a moment of like, did you just write this memoir? Did you just put your family's business out there? Like, was that the best idea? And I sort of know that voice and I'm like, that's probably not good. Like, I'll probably sleep on it and feel better in the morning. And I usually do. And so I think I just had to like, I don't know, for me, being vulnerable in this way isn't as hard. I sort of figure it out through my writing. And it shouldn't necessarily matter the feedback that I get. Like I can't base what I write on, only on feedback, but I did already get like a message from a mom, and we're only like 2 days into this book. And she was already like, I hope I'm not being like too much, but my daughter has this rare disease and she has similar symptoms. And for me, I'm like, no, that's not too much. Like, do I think Tophs has that same, it's a very, very rare disease? Probably not. Like, I will text Shelly and ask her if it's something we should look into. But the point is like, we're already making these connections. And so I think, again, I come back to that truth. Like, no, this was right for our family. Not perfect, but faithful,
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you're already getting like good responses. I was actually going to ask you if there had been like reader reactions so far that really meant a lot to you. And I assume that was one.
For sure.
I guess that leads me to another question I have, which is just like, did you have like audience or just like people that you felt you were writing this for, apart from obviously like you and your family and the people that you love? Like, were you thinking about parents or kids out there?
Yeah, the word that kept coming up as I was starting to like really draft was relief, which I think is a funny word because I feel like if you're like gonna put your heart and soul into something, like you want it to be like mesmerizing or like, amazing, like all these other words, writers, they come up with all these words, reviewers. And so I was like, relief? Like that almost feels like the absence of something, right? But at the same time, I think it's like what I needed. And I hope that it's what other, it doesn't have to be moms or parents, but other people who pick up this book where it resonates with them. Like, I do hope they feel some relief from whether it's like the grief or the juggling or the research or,
Or the loneliness.
yeah,
Like,
yeah. And so I think I'm coming to terms with that and like okay with that, sort of being it.
I think this book will help so many people feel like less alone, whatever they're facing in their family. And it might be a medical situation or a mystery like you faced, or it could be something completely different. Like, I know I felt and feel so much of like our family's experience when I read your book, and it's a very different experience, but I think it will just mean so much to like so many people. Another question, which I think we already kind of answered, is like about kind of sharing the book with your children. Like, I know that you're kind of planning to do that. But sort of a follow-up to that is, can you see like maybe another book years from now when your kids are older? I don't know. This is just, it's a question like from the chat, but like, do you see any kind of follow-up, or do you feel like this was the family story that you needed to tell?
Yeah, I'm laughing not because it's like a funny question, but because now the kids keep asking me, are you gonna write a book about me?
So they're each gonna need one.
Yeah.
That's the only fair thing.
So I am sensitive to that. But Nikki, like, we talked about this before, but like the fact that you're writing more books, that still gets me. Like, maybe just because I'm so close to this one and it took so much time, but I'm like, our friend Jamie, like, who just published a memoir, she's like, this is her 8th book. And I'm just like, I don't know how people write more than one book. So I'm not saying I won't. Somebody said make it a trilogy. But like, I don't know. It's gonna take me, that's another thing I've learned through this process, is just like, it takes me a while to process. It takes like things like this, as much as I love this conversation, I'm gonna go and stare at a wall for a while after, and like get back sort of what I've put out. And so part of this process has been like, this is just the way that I move through the world. And like, I'm learning to be okay with that. So I don't know. We'll see.
I feel like books are always a surprise, by which I mean like you're surprised to find yourself writing one. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but like, oh, it's just, yeah, I hear what you're saying. I think you'll write more books, but which I don't say to pressure you. I just like you said, like, this is what you do.
I'm getting back in that revolving door, Nikki.
Yeah. Don't worry. Julie too is a revolving door kind of editor. Speaking of, there's another question about the editing process. Like, were there sections of the book that you wound up sort of cutting while revising that you like wish had remained, or I don't know, just I'm curious, maybe you could also build on that and talk a little bit more about like that revision process, because I'm always kind of fascinated by that.
Yeah, we did have some parts that we cut, because I think part of it was just, for one thing, you've been to Charlottesville, and if you live there long enough, and I went to school at UVA there, and my husband's from there, he got multiple degrees, and so you just have this web of people. And so some of that was in the book. It was like, well, wait, if I mention this person, do I need to mention this person, and how we know each other? And so there are some super cool ways that the people in the book overlap. I talk about Paige, one of Tophs' first teachers, and how we ended up moving to a house where that was zoned for where she taught, and she was in his special education class, and so there are lots of like cool things that I don't even think are really coincidence that happen. And so I had to map all of those out, but like, then you have to like come back, and that's where Julie helped me sort of pare down, like, okay, I think you can keep some about this person because it does add to the book, but like, I don't know a specific example. Basically, we don't need to know like every detail of their life. And so sort of just figuring out like really what kind of creates a spark in the book, and then, what is like, great job, like you needed to write all that to figure this out, but we're actually not going to put that in the final draft, which is like 80% of writing, right? Like, good on you, you got there, and now you need to cut it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's like if you just hang too many, it's like too many ornaments on a Christmas tree, it just topples. Like I remember there were parts that I really for sure thought would be in my book, and they just wound up on the cutting room floor because there was no way. It was like I was trying to shoehorn them in there. And it is like you said, so much of it's like these are important people. Like, yes, they're very important people to you, but like, do they fit in the arc of your story anywhere? Maybe not. So, okay, there's another question here, which is, did like how and I don't want you to give away too much from the book, but basically like it's about community. And when you were trying to figure out what was going on with Tophs, were you able to find a community of like parents or mothers in similar situations, or was it like a very isolating experience?
Yeah, I think both. And we haven't gone into, I won't go into too much detail, but you and I have had conversations we've shared about some of those meetings at schools and how they can be difficult. And so it's not always like, oh, my kid, deals with this and your kid deals with the same exact thing. Like, let's connect. But there are like these sort of similar circumstances that I connected with parents through. Sometimes there were even like these very specific sites that I would go to where, parents were also searching for answers. And I've gotten a lot of help from parents like that, like on Facebook groups. Tophs is a carrier. This isn't too much of a spoiler unless you're really going to dig. But Tophs is a carrier of like a glycogen storage disease. And if you go on this certain Facebook page, it's filled with parents whose kids are also carriers of the disease genetically, and they shouldn't clinically show symptoms, but so many do. And I just feel like, just like the doctor, the developmental pediatrician in the book, who's like, he's got something, but we just don't know what it is. Like, I feel like in 5-10 years, this could be a completely different discussion. We're going to be like, oh, remember those kids who had one copy, like one mutated copy? They actually, they present with all these symptoms and we call it X. You know what I mean? So yeah, sorry. I took you down a road, but.
No, those are my favorite types of answers. I wanted to ask just how publication's been for you, and like great, I want to hear great things, like if there's been like favorite moments, just like where you're finding your joy this week.
Oh, that's so good. Joy. Yeah, it's been so great. It's been a whirlwind. Yesterday was a whirlwind. It was overwhelming, but in a good way. Somebody like the Instacarts and the gifts, like the deliveries have been fun. Like, I try not to be too materialistic, but I am, and I love gifts and surprises. And so people have sent like flowers and ice cream and earrings. Somebody one time, like right when I graduated from college, my friend and I made table nachos, and like I actually invited her over and we ate off like a tablecloth. And so yesterday she sent me all the ingredients and a tablecloth to make my own table nachos. So just like people who like really, I think that's my love language. Like, you pay attention to me, you figure out like what's ridiculous about me, and then you like throw it back in my face years later. Like that, I love that. And so I was overwhelmed with love in that way.
I'm so glad it's been like a good, heartful, exciting week. It's a little overwhelming too. I have like one more question too, which is just, we were talking about community a minute ago, and I get the sense, and reading your book too, I have a real sense of like who your community is, like your family beyond your family. But I'm sort of curious who you think of as like your writing community, like who helped you or enabled you to kind of write this book. And I know there's probably some overlap between those groups, but a book is so much like, I don't know, I've been thinking so much about community just over the past couple of years, being separated from so much. And yet, like where and how did your community like help you write this book?
No, that's really good. I mean, I think, there are some that are easy. So I would group you. I know you're not like at Catapult anymore, but like I would sort of group you with like the Catapult team.
You never really leave Catapult.
So the I'm going to cover that with the Catapult team.
Yep.
So many, so great. And I'm so scared of leaving people out. So we're just going to leave it at Catapult. And then also my Hopkins family. So the people who I went to grad school with, I think you mentioned Shannon, she's on here. She was a mentor and a help, instructors from Hopkins. And then there were people who like, don't like, they're not writers, like they do like really cool things. My friend Lisa is like a judge, like their teachers. They helped out with the church that we started in Charlottesville, and they would just consistently like check in, but not in an annoying way, like or just drop off. Like, you know how many
A
lattes?
revolving door.
I'm saying my second book is actually about the 1980s, but like they would just like drop off lattes all the time and just be sort of, you know, it was a way of just being like, keep going.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know what you're doing in there. Like, it's been a long time. When is your book coming out? But like, keep going.
Mhm.
And so I feel like those are like sort of 3 sections of community that were really important. Did I mention also, I'm just gonna throw this out there, like having a therapist, I think can be really helpful too.
Shout out to therapists and therapy. Okay. We're at 9 o'clock, so I feel like I could talk to you for 5 more hours, and that would be fun for me. But I will kick it back to the Strand now, and just thank you again for the great conversation and your generosity and your beautiful, beautiful book, which everybody should buy. I'm so like proud of you and this book, Taylor.
I love you.
I love you too.
Thank you so much for Taylor and Nicole for this really amazing and insightful event. If you haven't purchased a copy of the book, I dropped the link in the chat below. And thank you to everyone for attending, and have a good night. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.